Observations and judgments. In the last clip, I talked about empathy, which is meeting the person exactly where they're at with openness and curiosity without judgment and blame. Moving on, we'll be bringing our focus not only on how we can receive others, but also on how we express ourselves to others without blame so that our listeners can receive us more openly and more curiously to move towards solutions that meet both of our needs. One way to do this is to break our judgments down into components that don't contain the tone of blame. Let's explore together in this clip how we might do this. In order to learn to express our judgments without blame, it's good to first understand the difference between observations and judgments. To do this, it's helpful to remember the content that we covered in the first unit on stories and events. So, as you can see here, this is an example of you having sent a message to someone and it has been seen by your friend, but you're not getting a reply back. So, this is an event. And with this event, stories can form, such as, this person must be very busy, or this person may be mad at me and is not replying back. Does this sound quite familiar to you? So remember that stories include interpretations, evaluations, and judgments about an event. So, the idea about stories and events is exactly what observations and judgments are about. The reason why we want to be conscious of whether we're expressing ourselves with judgments or observations is because if we use phrases that use judgments, which in turn can convey blame, they trigger defensiveness in whoever is on the receiving end. So, what we want to do is to use less of blame and judgments, which are stories, and use more of observations or events, which help the listener listen more openly without immediately wanting to respond or argue. So, to give a few examples of a comparison between judgments and observations, so you never do what I want is a judgment. A judgment or evaluation is in italics in this table, and in this example, it's the use of the word never. Instead, you can say as an observation, the last three times I suggested an activity, you said you were not interested. An observation is a concrete, specific, and neutral statement of an event of what we see or hear in our environment. So another example is he's a poor soccer player. This is a judgment. Instead, an observation might be phrased as he has not scored a goal in the last 2 seasons. Another example, she's so disrespectful and rude, is a judgment, but when I asked her to be quiet, she rolled her eyes and flipped her hair, is an observation. The latter is observable and can be caught on film. So, if you imagine to be in the shoes of someone who receives a statement, you never do what I want. Let's imagine that your teacher says that to you. You never do what I want. How do you think you would respond to that statement? What feelings or thoughts would show up? Instead, imagine if your teacher said, the last three times I suggested an activity, you said you were not interested. Can you imagine which one would bring up more defensiveness in you and which one you would own up to more honestly? So, how do you actually express observations without judgments? This actually takes a few skills. So, first, you need to exercise mindfulness to discern raw data of just what happened. Then, you need to separate what you know in terms of raw data from your assumptions or interpretations of an event. I'll be sharing later about how you can do this more comprehensively. Also, you want to watch for the words that you tend to use to exaggerate a situation, such as always, never, ever, and whenever. Just to give an example, even within our teacher meetings, I hear teachers saying, oh, the students are always complaining about the homework, or all of the students are having trouble in their boarding houses. But when they're actually probed, are all the students really having trouble? They usually respond, well, Actually, it's two or three people who have explicitly expressed this concern. So watch out for the use of these exaggeration words. Now, this is a good rule of thumb to see if you're using judgments or observations to express yourself. It's to ask yourself, could this be caught on film? Because if something cannot be caught on film, then this means that it's going on in your head. So before making a statement like no one likes me or people are not nice to each other, ask yourself, can this be caught on film? And lastly, you want to use the following form to state your direct experience by using the I language. So you want to use the phrase when I see this or when I hear this rather than when you said this or when you did this, because the you language brings up more defensiveness in the listener. So again, why is practicing these skills and expressing yourself in a form of observation instead of judgment important? Well, stating clearly what happened without judgment or evaluation makes it easier for someone to hear us and to work towards a solution. This is why you want to be able to differentiate between an observation and a judgment. So, let me ask you a question, however. Are all judgments bad? Well, sometimes judgments are really important, right? There's a time and place for drawing conclusions on an event and acting according to these conclusions. So, for example, if you're at school and you come across someone you never met before, and the person is giving off a vibe that doesn't seem quite right, you might make a judgment that you need to report this person to the office because something is off, or you might make a judgment that you need to stay away from this person. In this case, there is nothing that might be caught on film, and there could be no clear evidence, and you are simply reacting off of your gut instinct. Sometimes this is important because it could keep you safe from a potential danger. What's important is that when you are making a judgment, that you recognize that you have made a judgment and to explore your own bias or the belief that you're filtering the observations through to make your judgment. So, how might you recognize your bias when you're making a judgment on a daily basis? To do this, it's good to use a ladder of inference as a reference tool. This tool was developed by Chris Argyris at the Harvard Business School. Now, this ladder of inference can be used to determine what we are adding to the pool of raw data of a direct experience. It gives us a way to ask ourselves if what we think happened, what actually happened, and it is actually reality, or is it distorted through our assumptions? So, as you can see here at the bottom of the ladder are observations. These are data in a form of words that I hear and actions that I observe, just as a video camera would. So, to give an example, I might have said hello to one of my students and they did not respond to me at all twice in the last week. So, this is my observation. Now, the second level is that I select the data. This is selecting the data that I feel is relevant and discarding the data that doesn't seem as relevant. So, the same student might have sat with me and chatted with me at the lunch table and even smiled as they passed by me a week ago, but I filtered that information out, only focusing on the fact that the student didn't respond to my hello. And the third level is that I add meanings to that experience based on what I feel is reasonable according to the data that I selected. So, based on this data, I think that maybe the student is angry at me, or maybe I did something to offend the student. Then I make assumptions, which means to make assumptions that my data and meanings are accurate and represent reality. So, my assumption is that I must have offended the student without realizing it, and they must not like me. And this represents reality. And the next level is that I draw conclusions based on my assumptions. So my conclusion is that I must offend other students who I think I have good relationships with, and they must not like me either. And then I update my belief about the world based on this conclusion as if everyone has the same conclusions and beliefs. So I believe that I'm not well liked by all of my students and perhaps many of my colleagues. I must not be a good teacher. And then I take actions based on this belief as if the belief is a proven fact. So I act by avoiding any social situations with students, like going to lunch at the cafeteria or going to any student social events so that I don't have to experience students avoiding me and feeling hurt as a result. But what's important here is that when I create this belief about the world and act accordingly, I then get into the loop of adjusting new data to fit my beliefs. My belief creates an unconscious bias which automatically selects the data that I attach myself to. So the next time that a student doesn't smile or doesn't respond to me in a friendly manner, this information gets selected from the diverse observations that I am actually immersed in, including observations that are contrary to the ones that are selected. So it's good to use this ladder of inference as a reference to reflect on the beliefs that we might be holding on to and how they might be driving our selection of the data. So when you are making a judgment, it's good to ask yourself, am I selecting the data or is this an actual observation that does reflect reality? Or what belief could I be holding on to based on my previous experiences that might be making me select certain data? So, this will help us to notice our own bias and become aware of the difference between an actual event and the interpretation or meaning we make of it. So, in the words of Lao Tzu, watch your thoughts for they become words. Watch your words for they become actions. Watch your actions for they become habits. Watch your habits for they become character. Watch your character for it becomes your destiny. So, when you make a judgment, it's important to notice that you have made a judgment and to be aware of where your judgments might have come from. This awareness will help you to see that your judgments and your observations are often two different things. Sometimes this awareness is enough, but other times you're in situations in which you feel you need to express this judgment to others because something has to change. And when you do, it's important to express judgments in a way that can be received in a more open way. Because as we know, certain judgments have a tone of blame, and if we express judgments directly, this can elicit a lot of defensiveness in the listener. So, to give an example, a scenario that I may be facing could be that my mom never calls me and neglects her own child. Now, this is a judgment that I have. Imagine if I were to say this statement directly to my mom. You never call me and you neglect your own child. Now, this will not go down very well. So, what I can do with this judgment is to break it down into three parts: observations, feelings, and needs. Now, starting with observations, the reason why I'm making this judgment is because I have experienced something. This is an observation. This observation is that in the last month, I called my mom every Sunday and I didn't receive any call back from her. So, since this is something that actually happened and can be verified or it can be caught on film, if I were to say this to her, it would be received fine without arousing any adverse reactivity from her. Now, based on this experience, a feeling shows up, and it's that I feel disappointed and maybe sad. Now, this is a feeling that is rooted within me and is not a known feeling that puts blame on my mother. If I were to say this using non feeling words, I could say that I am neglected or I feel ignored, but this would be a judgment and would bring up defensiveness in my mom. So, why do I feel disappointed? Because I have needs. My needs is that I want to see her name pop up on my phone because I care deeply about our relationship. So, A judgment can be broken down into these three parts: observations, feelings, and needs. And if I were to express these components just as they are, they can be received a lot more openly than if I were to state the judgment on its own. So instead of saying, Mom, you never call me and neglect your own child, I can say it as, Mom, in the last month, I've called you every Sunday and I didn't receive any call from you. And I feel sad and disappointed because I want to see your name pop up on my phone because I care about our relationship. Imagine how the latter will be received by my mom. It will be received a lot more openly, right? So, a judgment is an evaluation or an opinion of a person or an event. In this case, it's my mom who has not called me, and it often contains a piece of truth that is mixed with reactivity about my own feelings and needs. If we can disentangle our reactivity and translate our judgments into our feelings and needs, we have more choice and flexibility in how we relate internally to what has happened and in how we communicate that externally. Now, as you saw in a previous example as well, a negative judgment is an expression of our unmet needs. Since we are bound to experience having our needs unmet from time to time, it's natural for judgments to show up. So next time you're saying you're irresponsible for leaving your plates behind in the sink, it's because you have a need for cleanliness or ease. Or you're saying you never complete your homework on time. Well, a teacher would say that. That's because a teacher is looking for ease and respect. A judgment on its own is not a bad thing, and it's important that we don't judge ourselves for judging. When they show up, it's good to quietly say to yourself, Thank you, judgment, for alerting me to my unmet needs. Because by being curious about why we make our judgments and by understanding our unmet needs, we can use our effort to create solutions to meet these needs rather than trying to deal with the defensive reactions that might arise from stating this judgment. So, in summary, we all make judgments from time to time as we filter our reality through the lens of our beliefs. Sometimes these judgments need to be expressed to others, and when they do, it's important to remember two things. First, stating clearly what happened without judgment or evaluation makes it easier for someone to hear us and to work towards a solution. And second, translating judgments into observations, feelings, and needs can provide clues for how to move forward. When we make negative judgments, they're usually because our certain needs are unmet. As I mentioned in the previous lessons, there are multiple strategies to meet a need, so expressing a judgment in a form of observations, feelings, and needs opens up multiple possibilities for how to move forward. Now, this week's practice will be focusing on how to translate judgments into observations. So, best wishes in your practice.